everybody hear me okay? Good. Good afternoon, everybody. I think we've had the most inspiring weekend for a long time, and I've certainly enjoyed what I've been hearing. And I'd like to talk about urban pilgrimage to do with, as Stephen was saying, this great spine of Britain, which it's actually called the Belinus Line.
Sorry.
Yes. Venus, Belinus, tomatoes, tomatoes. And it was an equivalent to the north-south equivalent to the Michael line, the east-west line. And as you can see from our cover, here it crosses at the great Uffington White Horse, or as we prefer to say, dragon. And where the great dragons of the Mary and Michael and our dragons associated with this alignment called the Ellen and Belinus dragons meet and encompass that site. So we feel it's very much associated with the dragons. Gary has been actually investigating this alignment and its dragons for almost 20 years. But of course, work commitments meant that it has taken that long. But it's only until I met Gary through divine intervention, as these things happen, that we started to investigate and douse these great currents really much more intensely and spend much more time doing so. And this was 12 years ago. And here you see me connecting with this great stone of four stones, as they call it. And it's on the Lancashire-Cumbrian border in the most enchanted part of our landscape. And I just wanted to talk about my personal journey as I become more connected with these dragons in this alignment as the years went on. And of course, we travelled up and down this line many, many times. You know, it took 12 years of constant revisiting many of these sites, as we've been talked about. That's important to do. And going to different phases of the sun and the moon and the different seasonal festivals was always important to actually look at the variations that were going on within these great dragons that carry the intelligence of nature and the intelligence of everything with them, as we were beginning to find out. As I started to connect, I really reawakened, because although in childhood I was very connected to the landscape, I was brought up in a most beautiful part of the Dark Valley in Devon, and was brought up on a farm. But all I wanted to do was go out into nature and walk the lanes and the footpaths, the fields and the woods, and walk along the great river. In fact, even when I was 6 years old, I packed my suitcase and told my mother that I was off to live with the animals in the woods, because that only lasted half an hour. She went to me, but that was, this was really strong, and I planned it too. I had baked bean cans in my bag, and I was going to do that. So it was a very strong pull for me to be in nature. But of course, as all things happen, the world of work distracted me, and I went off to London and lived up there for many years, worked in, corporate business, and I had to really be very much in my masculine to survive in that world. And I think sadly, during that time, I sort of let go of that feminine connection within myself. I sort of dishonoured my divine feminine. So actually, this great journey that I started taking with Gary enabled me to reconnect with that aspect of me that I'd forgotten, because by working particularly with the feminine energy, this great creative energy that she brings to the land, they're both, what they bring is this fertilising creative energy to the landscape. And what they do also is, as they swoop across the landscape, connecting with this great British Isles and its very special geology, which contains, as been talked about, crystals, which is containing memory, and of course particularly the information and the history of our ancient past, and really the messages from the ancestors. And so they're carrying that as well. And that's what, as we were walking these energies, we were being imbued with that information. But for me particularly, I started to resonate massively with the feminine energy, and she's going through this great boulder. So many times I was sitting communing with her because she was really helping me get in touch with that divine feminine within myself. And as I was recognising imbalances within these serpents, because as we've also heard, you know, there's dark and there's light within our landscape, which upsets the balance and the harmony of these dragons. It was teaching me to understand and to look at that own imbalance within me. So together, as Gary and I were healing these great serpents where they were needed, I was actually doing that for myself. So it was a very life-changing experience for me, and I certainly wouldn't be here today if I hadn't been experiencing that. So I just wanted to just put into context this great alignment, because actually the alignment was first discovered by Guy Radcliffe Phillips in 1976. But Gary, when he was pilgrimaging along the Michael Line and sitting one down Glastonbury Tor all those years ago, in fact in the 80s, he had this real feeling that there had to be a north-south equivalent to the Michael Line. And so after he had, sort of getting these ideas, he ambled into Glastonbury and went into the first bookshop he saw, and out popped Brigantia, which showed him this alignment that had been discovered by Guy Radcliffe Phillips within his own home region, which was once the great Brigantia, the region of the Brigantes, a very powerful Celtic tribe in their time. But he projected this particular line that he was able to project all the way up to Carlisle and down to Winchester, but he didn't really investigate it further. But it was only until he started to acknowledge that there were also serpents like the Mary and Michael accompanying this alignment that his research really began. Now, I just wanted to tell you quickly about what marks this great alignment as far as natural and man-made features. And of course, I talked about Uffington, that marks the crossing of the Michael and Mary, and where the great dragons meet our dragons. But also St Catherine's Hill in Winchester, a Druid Gorsedd, and a hill, and you can just see here the hill fort. Another hill fort of Meon Hill in Warwickshire, a great place where you can really connect with spirit. Further up the line, you've got Middle Knoll. Meon actually also means middle. You've got Middle Knoll in the middle of the Forest of Bowland in Lancashire, a very powerful site. Further up, you've got Audley Edge right on the line, which looks over the great vast plains of Manchester. That has a particular legend of sleeping warriors with Arthur, and of course that story seems to be repeated a lot in the sites associated with this alignment. We've got Shap here. This is a watercolour of here is Shap, which actually, like Avebury, is almost the centre of the St Michael Line. Shap is almost at the centre of the Belinus Line, and it once had, like Avebury, a really incredible serpent temple. But sadly, it was all dynamited in the 16 and 1700s by the Earls of Lowther, who owned the land and wanted a railway to go through. They wanted to start quarrying the beautiful Shap granite that most of the stones were made of. And luckily, Lady Lowther painted this. Although the stones have been dynamited, just the stumps were left. All of that is gone now. Just a few stones remain. And then here, Hooley Hill, just west of Edinburgh, this great prehistoric complex, much bigger. Apparently it was the Stonehenge of Scotland. That's how it was nicknamed at the time. It had been lost to our consciousness for many years until the council cleared all the brambles away just a few years ago to reveal what was left of this site, which is this tumulus and 3 standing stones. But unfortunately the western runway of Edinburgh Airport has destroyed most of the archaeology. So, and then moving up to Dunkeld, the great King's Seton Schoon, fascinating place, Bear Athol, which is the sort of centre of the Highlands, and Legg, centre of Sutherland. But 2 key places which we call the Glastonbury Tors of our line, of the Belinus Line, is Bar Beacon, it's Great Hill, and which overlooks the plains of Birmingham and the cloud that looms over the Staffordshire-Cheshire border. both have great legends of great legends of when Barbican, a legend of the Archdruid seat. It had a lot of archaeology going back to Neolithic times, the Stone Circle and other great megaliths. Once were on the top, as were on the Cloud. The Cloud used to have a cheese ring here, similar stack of stones similar to the cheese ring on the Michael Line. So again, all around both hills, there's a lot of mysterious places full of legend and folklore, and even the Cloud still has the remains of the largest long burrow in Britain once upon a time, larger than West Kennet, but sadly very little remains of it, but it's still there, just about, a very magical place, as both these areas are. But of course, what we're going to be talking about today is the cities, because the Belinus Line is marked by 6 physical cities. Winchester and Carlisle were the ancient capitals, Winchester of the south and Carlisle of the north. They were both Camelots of Britain, and they go back, both of them have foundations that go back to the early British kings, which I'll talk about later. But we've also got Dunfermline, which was also the ancient capital of Scotland before Edinburgh, which many people have forgotten. A fascinating place, although so much has been lost. So it's a bit like Carlisle. Not a lot is left to actually show for their once very important status in Britain, and well, the whole British Isles. You've got Inverness also on the line, which is again a key place in the Highlands. I just wanted to mention, of course, Manchester and Birmingham, which you would expect to be modern cities, also right on the line. And interestingly, it's their oldest parts of both capitals that actually mark the alignment, but actually, as we found out, they have also very early foundations. So just going back to the dragons that we were following, we called them Ellen and Belinus. Had a great connection with them, and as I say, we were really starting to resonate with them, working with them for 12 years, you would expect that. But they do carry this intelligence that, in a way, is we realised was a sort of way of connecting us to the universal intelligence of everything, in a way connecting us to the collective. And this is what we were finding and realising as we were working our way, connecting very, very strongly with this line. And in a way, this wonderful Chinese tile shows the feminine. She's right in the valleys, touching water. So we always find her following the rivers and the streams, connecting to holy wells and springs, in caves. Whereas the male, he's up high. He touches the sun, so he's got this solar energy, being the consort of the feminine. He sort of takes care of her, but when they work in unity, they're a very powerful pair of dragons that cross together at key power points along this alignment. And he, of course, likes the hilltops and the spires and the towers and churches, just very similar to what the Michael and the Mary really were doing on the Michael Line. So to talk about the nodes is quite interesting, because there are 22 nodes of the Michael and Mary, although one at Bury St Edmunds, they don't actually join, but there's a fusion of energies there. So 22 in all. Well, we have 33 nodes, and of course 33 corresponds to the number of vertebrae in the back, hence our naming it Spine of Albion. But it's 22 nodes in England and 11 in Scotland, which we thought, that's quite a coincidence, isn't it? But I just wanted to talk about the node points, because the first node is on the magical island of the Isle of Wight. St Catherine's Hill, which you saw a photograph of, and Uffington as well, there's a double node there, as there is on Winchester. The Rollright Stones, Stratford, which is a very key place on the alignment, and on our currents, and so on. But so I just wanted to take you here to this cluster of nodes in Staffordshire and Cheshire. And of course, what we were realising as we were sort of trying to understand what these currents were doing as they went into the ground and came out again, is that they were connecting with the power of the land in the form of water and geology. You know, again, the crystalline structure of our very unique geology in this country. And of course, what happened in Staffordshire is that most of what came out of the ground there fueled the Industrial Revolution. Very, very powerful geology. And this is what's feeding the serpents. They're feeding and invigorating and keeping them invigorated so that they can keep fertilising the land and keep it in balance and harmony for the well-being of the British Isles and for the people. And that's the key. This is what we were realising, that because they were connected to human consciousness as well as the consciousness of the universe, that we are integral to these great serpents. And I just wanted to show you this wonderful carving of the central alignment here, associated with this dragon, but with two other dragons either side. So actually, we found that the alignment itself also has power, as does the serpent. So we were working with the trinity of power here. So where do these dragons and alignment come in? Where does it come in from the south? Well, the great temple sacred temple of the Isle of Wight. The Druids saw it as one big temple, landscape temple, and it's some of the most paranormal events on this because of its geology. Again, it's upper green sand, also nicknamed dragon's food as well. And where they leave is this wonderful area called Farrier Head, right at the top of Scotland, very close to Durness, and this is the little church of Balconneil. And it goes back to the time of the Coldees, and it was also a summer residence of the bishops. And of course we found in many cases that these dragons were seemed to be around winter or summer residence of the bishops throughout the British Isles. So the first city that we really started to experience urban pilgrimage was in Winchester. And we sort of initiated ourselves as we were travelling up from the south coast along the great River Richin that goes straight through the centre of Winchester. And we were talking about water and the power of water. Well, for us it was very, very important to connect and honour the rivers at all the cities that we were visiting, because we found that the rivers were very, very important to the balance and harmony of cities. And if the rivers were out of balance, this seemed to sort of have a knock-on effect with the prosperity of a town. The Queen of Rivers, the River Itchen, is still an honoured and fast-flowing river, which has many, the swans still nest on the river, and as we doused the feminine connecting with the river, she sort of floated along it, and we were there connecting with the river. It took us to the foot of the Great St. Catherine's Hill, that really was the first spiritual centre of this region. And going back to the early British kings, this was their sun hill. This was the place where they went for ceremony. And in the centre here, amongst those trees, is what was once the Sun Hill, now not much of a mound, unfortunately, but it's one of the key node points. In fact, there's two on the top of this hill. You can just make out the bank and ditches of the hill fort. It was even known when King Canute was in control of our country as he named it Winton, meaning holy mound or hill. It's always been regarded as the key spiritual point of the area. So it was important for us to first connect before we went into the city. And of course the other place the other key node point on top of this hill is right within this great labyrinth. So the node is inside, the first node is inside the tree, which we came to call the Inner Sanctum. And then if you can just make out the outline here, the sort of foundations of what is believed to have been St. Catherine's Chapel, founded by Henry of Blois. And Henry of Blois, as we found out, was a very powerful man. He was King Stephen's brother. He was William the Conqueror's nephew. he was a very rich man. He was also abbot of Glastonbury. So he was in control of Winchester, really, and as we will discover, our currents as well, the great dragons. He was clearly a geomancer also. And so we believe, because there's an association with the Knights Templars here, that there was some sort of ritual going on here where they would connect with the mound, come through the chapel, and then walk the labyrinth. And of course, what they were doing is not just connecting with the energies, but they were sort of on some sort of pilgrimage for themselves. I was just talking to my friend Anna, who's a great labyrinth builder. We were talking about that actually walking labyrinths is like doing a pilgrimage in itself. And so this was a very powerful beginnings of our pilgrimage through Winchester. By walking this labyrinth, we were connecting with the land, with the dragons, and we were actually, it was helping us to balance our yin and yang energies as we went from side to side, connecting with the female current and then the male. And of course for Gary and I, this pilgrimage was also important because here we were, the two of us, in partnership. So it was helping us to not just connect with our own inner yin and yang and to know how that feels to be in balance and harmony, but as a partnership. That was also helping with the balance of our partnership as well. So as we progress down the hill, we come into the city of Winchester. I just wanted to show you how the energies dance around the alignment that comes through Winchester College, and then through Cheney Court, the old courthouse, and then just misses the cathedral and goes through. This was the old palace of William the Conqueror, and the first thing he did when he defeated Harold, Battle of Hastings, was come to Winchester and build a palace. And what he also did was clear from this area where the feminine goes through 2 minsters and a nunnery from this area to build his great Norman cathedral. And the male connects with the castle site on the top of the hill, which was the old site of the early tribes of this area going back to the Iron Age, and the early British, the late Bronze Age settlement too. They carry on. She connects with this area, the Brooks Shopping Centre. Brooks, of course, standing for another place of springs, as this was too. This was a whole area full of springs. And then she ends up at Hyde Abbey, which was once the old New Minster built by King Alfred the Great, which once stood here. So, but we're talking about the British kings as well. The early British kings who the king who founded this capital, the old capital of Britain, was King King Lud Hudibras, and he was an early, late Bronze Age king who came to this capital and founded the spiritual centre as well as an economic centre. His father, King Leal, founded Carlisle, also the alignment. So they must have had this connection. So this is why we believe, although a lot of history has been lost in between of places of what could have been palaces of these British kings along the line. But Malmutius came along later and refounded Winchester. Now he was an interesting man because he created laws that were very sophisticated. He wanted to eradicate crime. He wanted to see a city that was free of violence, that would be a wonderful place to live. And he wanted, as it says here, he wanted his people to be cultured and cultivated. But that's quite something for a so-called blue-painted race that the Romans supposedly civilized. And it was interesting that King Alfred the Great continued these laws when he was king. The female takes us, as I say, to Winchester College, one of the sort of top public schools still today. It still thrives. It's still an important part of Winchester. But William of Wykeham, who was also very powerful in his day, but came from humbler beginnings than Henry of Blois, who founded this college and also New College, Oxford, seemed to be tapping into something else here as well. because he placed the statue of what appears to be, could be the Madonna and Child on the gate as you walk, on the entrance gate as you walk into the college, which he named Mary of Winton. Not St. Mary, but Mary of Winton. So as a bishop, he would have been walking around Winchester connecting with these currents, and of course with the node point in the cathedral he would have been imbued with their energy, and we're wondering whether he was inspired by the feminine energy. And here is the great Winchester Cathedral where we have a node. Now what is interesting is that this cathedral was built over part of the old Saxon minster, but this back area was built over the marshy area. This bit is built over sandstone. So why would they do that? Because actually William the Conqueror arranged for a whole forest of oaks to be felled to create a raft for that part of the cathedral to sit on. And of course it's still causing instability within the structure, as it has done for centuries, with towers falling, so it's been rebuilt many times because of this strange arrangement that they have here. And why would that be? Because underneath, the node point is connecting with this holy well. And in fact there are two here, because as I said, this was a place of springs. But when this was part of the Roman city, they actually properly bored into the ground and actually created this very deep shaft to connect with the deep underground water, which was very, very important. As Sylvia was talking about, the water energy is very important for our existence. And this was actually an old Etruscan tradition of, before they built their cities, they would get their diviners which was sort of also looking at the lay of the land, but with their diviners, their priests, they would find the best place for the heart of their city. They would then build this shaft deep into the ground, because for them it was connecting the underworld with the surface world and the heavens. And before they did anything, they would collect up the soil and put it down into the shaft to connect with the water as an offering, and then put more offerings into it. So it was a real ceremony when they found their centre, and from then they built their cities out from the centre. So we believe this was probably part of the original centre of the Roman town. So but William the Conqueror was very keen to build that part of the cathedral over this point where the two energies node, and it's a very powerful area. So when we take people into the cathedral and they're dowsing, in this back area at the east end of the cathedral, everybody gets a real hit, because also, of course, you're within these great walls of the cathedral which are amplifying this energy. So it's very, very powerful. And as this photo shows, the springs are still gushing with water. Every winter they rise up and flood the crypt, so you can't go in it. And so the springs are still there, still moving, and still very active, and are helping revitalise the energies as they node. So it's keeping the place in balance and harmony, which is actually also meaning that it's helping with the prosperity of the town and its people. And Winchester is certainly a very prosperous place even today. Although it's not the capital, it's a place where a lot of people come to. It's actually a prosperous city, and one of the other reasons for that is that that's the next slide. But I just wanted to talk about this path which marks from the cathedral precinct, marks the alignment to the palace, which is now called the square, where people sit and gather and drink coffee and have their wine in the wine bars. Also, just below it is the courthouse, Cheney Court, and as I had on the slide, both Cheney Court and the part of the cathedral precinct has been recorded as having a stone circles. So this shows that actually Winchester goes back even further to prehistoric times, a great place of ceremony. So the stone circles were important, and there's still megaliths from those circles dotted around Winchester if you know where to find them. Also, part of the palace was St. Lawrence's Church. It's still there today. It's been rebuilt many times. But interestingly, the bishops of Winchester still go there today before they're inaugurated into into the cathedral as bishops, they have to spend 2 hours here on their own before they get dressed. And what's that all about? Were they connecting with this, greater collective by sitting here, contemplating for 2 hours? Very interesting. Also, so I was going to say, also the spirit path to the great sun mound to the west of the cathedral is also still intact. This was what became the sun mound here. The Normans built their keep over it, which is very common. Became the great castle of Ellen and Henry, became their Camelot, and they also rebuilt Carlisle Castle as their Camelot also, which is also built on the keep is also built on the Sun Hill in Carlisle. Were they aware of this? I'm sure they were. And as we were to find out, the Angevin dynasty had a great hold of this line during their time as the rulers of Britain. And it's interesting too that here you have the Ellen and Henry at rest where they were buried at Fontevraud Abbey. And if you project the line, Belinus Line, down through France, it goes straight through Fontevraud Abbey. Also, Conqueror's Chapel and Parliament Building, where many great leaders from all over Europe would come and meet the Conqueror and later rulers of Britain. So it was always a very important place, and it's still there. Although the castle is gone, replaced by barracks, the army barracks are now in that spot. The Great Hall is still there, and in it is still Arthur's Round Table. Of course, I explained that this was the castle was the great Camelot of Henry and Eleanor, because they believed that they were the sort of reincarnation of Arthur and Guinevere. So they were very tuned into that great couple, whether they were mythical or real. The energy of Arthur and Guinevere still resonates today so strongly, and certainly very much so in Winchester. And with this round table, of course, it was apparently they believe it was constructed by Henry and Eleanor, because bits of wood have been found inside dating from that time. But then it was restored by Edward III, who wanted to recreate the great pageants that he believed Arthur and his knights would have taken part in Winchester during his reign. And then Henry VIII took it on and placed his image just here. But you can still visit it today. But one of the biggest discoveries we found with Winchester, having followed these paths and the dragon path through the city, was when we returned much later, many years later, to St Catherine's Hill to do another great sort of walk of the labyrinth to check whether the serpents were still intact, because unfortunately Winchester Hill is subjected to the light and the dark, the polarity is all things. But healers over many years have been coming to St Catherine's Hill to sort of clear any residual energy left over from, sadly, ritual stuff going on there, and it's still going on today. But there's people sort of in place, hidden away, that come and clear that energy very frequently, including us now. And part of that healing ritual is to walk the labyrinth, which seems to sort of create this balance by connecting on all these levels and with our heart centre. So we were on St Catherine's Hill, and Gary suddenly stood there and said, I can see another alignment going on here. And from the labyrinth, he could see that there was a line of sights, and which we later discovered was the high altar of the Winchester College Chapel, the high altar of the Cathedral, the high altar of St Bartholomew's Church, and High Gate, which is part of the Hyde Abbey complex, which is sadly gone, except for St Bartholomew's Church and the gate, which strangely is still there, but everything else is gone. Ancient crossroads at Whitchurch, which our currents also connect with, and Beacon Hill, and Sidown Hill, going straight between the cusp, here they are. And when Gary found this, he rushed home and looked up his Sky programme, and after lots of working out, found out that this was where the central star of the Cygnus constellation, Deneb, would actually set and then rise again at around 500 BC. And here's Beacon Hill, a very unusual shape for a hill fort. This hourglass shape, which makes me believe it's more of has a more ceremonial nature. Here is the node point. Next to it is this grave. And below the hill fort, in that cusp where Durness sets, is Highclere Castle. And what was it? A summer residence originally of the bishops of Winchester. And of course we're finding their residences, their palaces everywhere on our currents and the alignment. Henry of Blois seemed to me to know, I don't think it was coincidence, there was too many of his buildings associated with this alignment and the currents. And what was interesting is that on Sidown Hill, where the Dunfermline sets, where the great Carnarvons who built Highclere had a folly, they called it Heaven's Gate. And who is buried here next to the node? Lord Carnarvon, who founded Tutankhamun's tomb. He chose to be buried on this hill on this cosmic axis, which we just discovered next to the node point, just like the Chinese emperors. So this is the great swan that represents the Cygnus constellation, with Deneb as the sort of brightest star. Now, of course, Andrew Collins has written this wonderful book called The Cygnus Mystery, which talks about the sudden realization that the constellation Cygnus was actually worshipped by many, many tribes around the world, and he goes into it at length. And they believe that it was to do with the soul. When the soul leaves the body, it continues to Cygnus and to the great rift in the Milky Way. And they called the Milky Way the River of the Souls. And other tribes believed it wasn't just where the souls left and returned to, but also where they came from. And we found that actually the Belinus Line also aligned, as did many of the monuments that we later discovered as we continued to our journey and went back to these sites, that we found that certain stones and monuments and certain entrances of the henges and like Wayland's smithy all orientated to the rising and setting of Deneb. And I just wanted to talk about this is the Milky Way, of which Cygnus is right at its centre, sort of with the dark rift. And what is the dark rift? It's dust. And what is it obscuring? The centre of our galaxy. This is where we were birthed from. And we are right, this is where we are, the planet Earth is right up here on an outer arm. And so if you look at quantum physics and look at what they're doing with sort of particle physics, that particles that have been split and sent far away from one another are still communicating, proving that we are all connected through something like this. This is our source, this is where we came from. And this is where I believe the tribes were focused on more so, because of course if the dust wasn't there, this is what we'd see. But they knew this was the source of everything, and this is where we went to, and where when we went home after death. So I just wanted to talk about Carlisle in contrast to Winchester, which is almost like its sister city in the north, founded by the father of King Hudibras, who founded Winchester, King Leal, sorry. And of course Carlisle is named after King Leal, Carlisle. Once a great city, and the Romans came here and founded a city, as did the great the kings of the kingdom of Northumbria, the Angles, who actually took over a huge part of the north of England, including Yorkshire. And they decided to make Carlisle their capital. Not York, but Carlisle. So during that time, they foresaw a very important spiritual centre, and their plan, King Ethelred had planned, he took St Cuthbert there, and they planned to expand this old city of the Romans and the early Celtic tribes into a very, very important spiritual centre with palaces and a huge cathedral and so on. But unfortunately, Ethelred was called away to fight the Scots and the Picts, and with St Cuthbert and his wife waiting there to receive him home to continue this great plan, he never came back. He died on the battlefield, and so all their plans just whittled away. So Carlisle never really saw the greatness that was planned for it. Now, as we approached Carlisle, we, like with the Itchen, we were connecting with the great River Eden. It's a magnificent river, and it flows north, just like the Nile. And it was seen as a very, very special place. And so for us, it was always important to connect with the river, to connect with the water energy as we entered the sacred space of the cities. And we did so with the Eden. And in the tradition of William Mountsie, who journeyed from the source of the Eden to where it left the islands of the Solway Firth on the west coast, he was inspired to inscribe these sayings on the stones on the shores, on the banks of the Eden. We also, Gary and I also felt that we needed to walk the source to the where it left into the sea. We felt it was a very important initiation into the landscape, and so we did that. But on our route, we found at certain places there was something not quite right, something out of balance, and a lot of folklore and legend attached to the Eden sort of alluded to something not being quite right, and we were later to find what was happening with the energy of Carlisle in great contrast to Winchester. So the Normans did come after the Danes, after of course the Angles left. The Danes came and just completely destroyed Carlisle. It was just left in absolute ruins for 200 years, and it wasn't until Henry I came and decided to start rebuilding it. He built, over time, the Normans built this great cathedral, but it didn't last long. It's now reduced to this. But inside is one of our nodes where Ellen and Belinus currents still want to connect. And what do they connect with? Well, next to the node is these wonderful kissing dragons, one with a beard and one with a bonnet. Do you think the stonemasons sort of knew what's going on? I perhaps think so. But sadly, unlike Winchester, where the nodes are connecting deep with the water energy, this one is blocked up, as are all the springs in that area. They're not just blocked, they've gone. Some of them have just disappeared completely. So what is that doing? That's blocking the energy. It's stifling the natural energies of the earth to come to the surface and help invigorate the land and its people. So as we started to journey through Carlisle, taking people with us who were mainly local, because we wanted to actually get groups together, and a lot of locals were fascinated by our title, Sacred Carlisle, quite curious about what that all meant. So, of course, having introduced them were Dowsers, so they understood about the serpent energies. So, and luckily we had a local historian who sort of had one sort of tentative foot in our world, but sort of just about. But certainly after the journey we took him on, he was certainly much more intrigued. But one of the first places that the feminine energy comes to, she comes up south away from the River Eden that skirts around the side of Carlisle, is to this place called Portland Square Gardens. Now, don't be fooled by the flowers. It's actually quite a dark, sinister place, as we found out. There's something going on with the energies there. And I visited it often. We were trying to clear the energies, and each time we went back, it seemed to be out of kilter again. The Masonic Hall is just there. She goes straight through it. Now, when we were talking about this, and we were saying, what do you feel here, everybody? And people were having various ideas about what perhaps going on here. And our friend, the historian, said, well, there might be one answer. There was a full-blown satanic ritual going on here 2 years ago, which the police broke up. And it was in all the newspapers, but actually nothing was ever done. The sort of story disappeared. We think, that might have something to do about what's going on here. So, with that in mind, we continued our journey into the main square. Now, St. Cuthbert, apparently, according to old records, discovered a fountain when he arrived in Carlisle, still gushing water, which they believe was here, where this monument now stands. The female goes straight through there into the Guildhall next door. The male, meanwhile, as he comes up the south, goes through these great towers built by Henry VIII. This one in particular, which was a prison and a courthouse. This is so common for him to be connected with that. This great, huge tower as a as a sort of symbol of imprisonment and trial. And of course, so this is another place where the water isn't flowing. The Mail carries on from the citadel to the St Cuthbert's Church, and this area of the church was said to have been the site of a Roman temple. It's not actually far from the square, so it would be within the old Roman fort. Also, there was a holy well apparently here, completely gone, disappeared, no trace of it left. But also in this area, it was said there was an Arthur's Burh. Now, there's more stories about King Arthur in Carlisle than anywhere else in Britain. There is books and books written about old rhymes about the antics of Arthur and his knights in this area, and the fact that there were many buildings associated with Arthur in Carlisle, as I say, one of which was Arthur's Burh. So with archaeological downers, we took them here to see what they found, and actually they believed they found a great sort of Thane Hall-like structure right here, which would have been right on the flow of the Mail. So here we have many sites where the water should be flowing, and it's not. It's very stuck and very blocked, and actually gone from people's consciousness completely. The Mail carries on to the Sun Hill, where the keep is today, very similar to Winchester Castle. This is where another castle that Eleanor and Henry came to and turned into their Camelot. And of course, just up the line was Dunfermline, and Mary, St Margaret and King Michael of Camorr ruled over Dunfermline at that time, and they gave birth to Matilda, who married Henry I, who gave birth to Matilda, who married Geoffrey of Anjou, who gave birth to Henry II. So he wasn't far from his great-grandparents at this stage. The feminine energy is just up here, going through what of course is now the barracks, but it used to be the ceremonial site of the early Celtic tribes of this area. But what has happened to Carlisle is threefold. You've got the blocked up wells, and you've got this huge bypass that splits the old ceremonial route between the springs and the cathedral to the Great Sun Hill. And to get there you have to go through a subway, and you have to pass this stone, this great pink granite stone, and we know that granite is very powerful. On it is inscribed a curse. A curse, cursing the old Reaver families who have their names inscribed in granite on the ground as you walk through. A lot of people were completely up in arms about this cursing stone. Why would you want to put that there, as well as the bypass? And of course, this is how it once looked before the bypass and before the cursing stone was there. There was a through route from the springs that were once flowed, from the cathedral site that was once all powerful, to the castle site. That has all gone now. That's wiped away, as is all the archaeology going back to the Roman and the Celtic tribes. It's all disappeared. So with our group, with all that we'd found, from the sort of satanic ritual stuff at the south of the city to the blocked up wells, we stood on this piece of grass here and we envisioned love and light. And they were all really up for it once they realised why, which would explain why Carlisle is out of balance, why it's a depressed and very blocked city. It has not thrived at all. It's actually quite insignificant. It's quite a dour place. There's nothing much going on there. It feels quite empty, whereas Winchester thrives. It throngs with people. People love going there. The cathedral is small in comparison to what it once was. So by pushing love and light through the serpents, what we did was we created this sort of etheric link from the Sun Hill to the spring area of the cathedral. So we had to put it in the etheric because, of course, there's nothing there to sort of cling on to now, but we wanted to reinstate that connection again. And so what has happened, this postcard actually came from one of the ladies who was doing this, and she sent it to us and said, look, I found this. And so we passed it all around the locals and said, look, focus on this road, see it reconnect, the castle reconnected in a physical form as well as the etheric form that you showed us, and hopefully the fortunes would start to increase in Carlisle. So I just wanted to take you to Manchester, where we came across this great altar hall that marks the line just to the south of it. And it was owned by the Radcliffe family, who were descendants of the Angevin dynasty, who were very prominent in this part of Britain. And they built this great manor house in the early medieval time. And in the 1300s, they brought in the reavers, the weavers, thinking about it, the weavers from the Flemish weavers who started the great textile industry in Manchester. So it was actually the Radcliffes who started that off. And then to the north of Manchester, you have another stronghold of the Radcliffe family, descendants of the Angevins, at Radcliffe Tower. Actually, it was a big manor house similar to Althorp Hall. This is all that's left of it. It's in a part of Radcliffe. Radcliffe's a part of Manchester, just on the outskirts of northern of the city centre. It was, of course, once a thriving town, no more, because, of course, the milling industry has gone. So it's quite a depressed area. Two of the ladies that came on our Manchester pilgrimage were from Radcliffe. Of course, they didn't know each other, interestingly enough. And they said to us, "Oh, that's interesting about Radcliffe, because we're actually from there, and we're desperate to leave, but we can't. So we're stuck there for some reason. We just can't find the motivation to leave." We said, "Well, that's interesting, because when we first visited here, we found the energy very dark indeed. In fact, the energies which node inside this tower were so weak that we could hardly find them. It took 4 attempts to even get close, because the site guardian was saying, 'No, you're not coming.' Because, of course, we always ask permission. We always check that we can work with these sites before we start anything. And it was saying, 'No, you can't come here. It's something about the timing. The time is not right,' they were saying. But we did manage to get a stronger, as we were doing more healing, sort of north and south of the line with the currents, we were getting a better feel for the currents, and they were becoming slightly stronger. And we did find that, although we couldn't go inside because we were stopped from doing that, we did find that there was a node inside. And interestingly, there's a story attached to the manor house. The Radcliffe, one of the Radcliffes remarried, of course the stepmother was jealous of his beautiful daughter, the usual thing, and she went and cooked her daughter in a pie, the stepdaughter in a pie. That's the story, and she was called Ellen, just like our feminine energy. And we thought, that's interesting, that's a sort of clue going on here. So we're going back into the city centre. Having visited these two sites, we decided to take a group. I just wanted to show you the great entrance of Traffic Park, because the male energy is actually not going through the city centre, it's the feminine energy that does that. The male is actually going through Salford, and the male connects with all the great old houses and estates of the cotton kings and the mill owners and the textile barons, and the ancient family of the Stanleys, who of course had control of this area for centuries, and this is their estate. And just here, just behind the picture actually is this stone. It was apparently a stone where people would come and heal themselves of the plague by dipping their hands in the water of this very powerful stone. Where it came from, that's been lost. It was moved to the site next to the entrance of Traffic Park, but it's also known as the Arthur's Stone. So I thought, well, that was interesting. But the feminine energy, as she goes through the city centre, she goes through this area where was once a great Roman fort next to the River Medlock, and also this was part of the, before the Romans came, the early Celtic tribe centre. So down to the south of the city centre, this was where the old spiritual centre was. And as you can see, it wasn't just the Medlock, but the River's Irwell was also circling around here too. But what we also discovered in the legends of the city was that actually it has earlier foundations, where the early tribes worshipped these two goddess dome-shaped hills, which one at the south of the city centre and one at the north. That's where the name comes from, not Manchester, but Manchester. the mounds, the breast-shaped hills. So this was no wonder the feminine energy was coming through here. It was where they worshipped the goddess in the very early times, and the Romans decided to settle by the sort of the southern end of the southern hill by an area called Deansgate. This is what this area, Castlefields, where the old Roman fort now looks like today. And the rivers Medlock and the Irwell, which is actually, they were very close to each other, they were converted and really the waters corralled into these canals that fed the Salford docks and carried the great barges full of wool and cotton into the warehouses that used to be all in this area. And of course, from when the mills closed, this area became derelict. The warehouses were empty, and this canal and the rivers were dirty. Nothing was happening here, but luckily in the 90s this was all renovated, and it's now this wonderful area where you can sit and feed the ducks, and a little duck house here. And actually the feminine energy comes across this duck house to here, to this well. And this was right at the heart, it would have been, of the Roman fort. And what we'll be talking about with the well at Winchester, they would have marked their centre by actually creating this deep shaft. And of course, it's because the rivers have changed. It's standing right next to this canal, but it would have been right at the centre of the Roman city. So, of course, in our true fashion, with our being compelled to do some healing, but also some offerings. So we put offerings down as well. So we continue to walk our way up through the city centre, which is quite a challenge in Manchester, as you can well imagine. And Granada TV is probably the closest structure that you will get to the old southern breast-shaped hill. This is the area where it once was, close by. So we were following her. She would have connected to this goddess hill as she travelled north to through along Deansgate to the west of Deansgate, where we found, actually, interestingly, she was connecting with a lot of sites associated with creativity, as she does, places where people gather to play music. And there are also many churches on her flow. They've all gone now. This is all that's left of St. John's Church. Was commissioned by John Byron in 1769. There's nothing recorded that was any earlier on this site. But when we took our group there, they actually connected in to the cosmic energies there. And one lady said, "Oh, I feel that they actually worship the stars at this site." She said, "I feel this was a sort of star temple." So we all sort of got quite excited with that. And she had many fascinating insights on our journey through Manchester. So with the churches gone and the breast-shaped hill gone, there was not a lot to really tie the feminine energy to very much as she travelled along Deansgate towards the north of the city. But she does go through this later building, which was built by John Ryland's wife. He was a great cotton king, very wealthy man who lived in one of the great estates that the Belinus Line goes through, interestingly. She built it in the proportions of sacred geometry. It's the most extraordinary building. It's like a cathedral of learning. It's very, very powerful. And she goes right through the reading room. And it is adorned with dragons and green men, inside and out. We saw so many. It was a fascinating building. And as I say, a very powerful one. So this is the great Deansgate that would have connected the two great goddess hills, one at Castlefield, and then we're travelling north to where the cathedral is. She is travelling on, as I say, on the side where it was known to be these churches dedicated to female sites and St. John, the library, and also these places of music. And on the other side, there's all the town hall, the court buildings, the great churches dedicated to male saints. So she's keeping away from that very masculine side of Deansgate. And also, what is interesting is Deansgate was named after the lost Dean River, which once would have beflowed at the top of Deansgate and is now lost. So we thought this is quite interesting, what's going on here. The feminine wasn't being honoured anymore. But what was linking the two hills was the great river Irwell. And again, sadly, the Irwell is lost because of the canals being built, but also to do with the fact that they built, when they rebuilt Manchester into what you see today, they built everything over the top of the river, so it's deep underground, away from sight. Oh, okay, that's fine. So this is the great Manchester Cathedral, which is again only slightly, it's actually not as big as it used to be. It was bombed twice by a World War II bomb and an IRA bomb. So there's a lot of damage in this area, and it's right on the northern man-shaped hill. This is how it would have looked. The Dean would have come in and met the Irwell right at the base of this hill. So it would have been once a very powerful place. Inside the cathedral, we were very interested to find this painting. And here you can see that this chained dragon. Now I know that this is supposed to do with a Christian message, but for all our group, we focused directly on this and thought, that's interesting. And of course the ladies from Radcliffe thought, chained feminine. Something's going on here that we need to look at. So we did a great healing inside the cathedral. We sent, like we did in Carlisle, we sent love and light down through the energies, connecting to the old lost rivers, and sort of sending them love and light, seeing them shimmering to the surface once more, and sort of bursting like fountains all along Deansgate, connected with the feminine being invigorated. And then with the safety of the cathedral walls, we then sent love and light up to just to the north to Radcliffe. Helps our understanding of the spirit. If the heart of the place, as with people, has been violated, ripped apart, and neglected, this can have an adverse effect upon its fortunes and undermines the psyche of the people, keeping them unmotivated and uncaring of their environment. If you block up the wells and change the river courses without care and love, this stifles, blocks and causes disharmony and balance of the earth energies. I just wanted to say that, of course, you've got this great image of what a geomancer would be doing, which is also a symbol of us working in unison. They are part of us. They are something that we need to be conscious of and mindful of and loving towards as we walk through our landscape. And I just want to end on these words inspired by Barry Brailsford, who is a New Zealander who was asked by the Maori to go and open up the old trails of the ancient race of the White Taha of New Zealand, placing healing stones and doing incantations and singing along these trails. He says, as we walk between these sites, we carry the dream of the world we want to see, because we are embodying timeless wisdom from the past that sought a compassionate, just world for all. This inspires us to find the change we need to shape within ourselves to a new way of being. With the power of love, we need to be the dream makers and the pathfinders. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. That was absolutely stunning.
Debt Free TV, in association with GetOutOfDebtFree.org.